Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And with me, as always, is my friend in the postmodern world, Mr. Ken Kelly. How you doing, Ken?
Oh, I'm good, Rory. It's great to be here. It's interesting you say postmodern because that's going to tie into something that we'll be bringing to you in this episode. Episode 33 is a packed episode, and we've got some really interesting topics, and I think some current topics as well, because we're going to start off by speaking about something that is currently in the news as we're making this recording, and that is about counsellors in schools here in the UK. So we're going to be discussing what that might look like going forward. Really interesting theory with Rory today, and this is where it ties in because we're going to be looking at postmodernism in therapy. Now, I believe this is a little bit like Fight Club. So the first rule of Fight Club is that we don't talk about Fight Club. What's postmodernism, Rory? What can we expect?
Well, I think we can expect a little wander through a modern philosophy. We start off with a little wander of modern philosophy, and then we'll be asking some really fundamental questions about what we believe to be true in terms of therapy. And after that, in a real postmodern world, then people can make their own minds up about it and construct their own realities from it.
I'm looking forward to that. And the reason I put in the Fight Club reference for anybody who may have seen the film is because when we were doing the preamble, I said to Rory, what are you going to be telling us about postmodernism? And he says nothing, because that's postmodernism in itself. So so there it is. And then we've got a debate, and we're going to be speaking about insurance as a counsellor. So what should you expect from an insurance company? What should you be looking for? Because you do have choice out there. And how your insurer is actually sometimes right there in the therapy room with you, but that's we'll come to that towards the end of today's podcast. So kicking off with something that's in the news at the moment, Rory and I have just looked over a blog post on a school's website where they kind of bring you the latest and greatest of what's happening on the forefront, and there is talk about bringing counsellors into schools. What's your thoughts and feelings on this, Rory?
Well, speaking as someone who spent 7 years as a school counsellor, I think it's a splendid idea, and it's an initiative that can't come quick enough, in my view, because there's a really real need to support young people in what is becoming quite a difficult world for young people to navigate. And, you know, as I'll touch in my postmodern discussion, our society is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And there's just so many things now facing young people that sometimes it's overwhelm, and they need to speak to someone who's an independent person, not someone who's got an agenda, not someone who's an agent of social control, someone they can speak to in confidence and just explore where they are in the world. So it's a great thing. They've been running counsellors in schools in Wales for some time now. So I think it's a win for young people. It's certainly a win for people who are, you know, saying there isn't a lot of work for counsellors after they've qualified. Well, you know, how many schools are there in the country? So that's potential employment. And I also think it's going to have a knock-on effect for people who are offering training, specialist training to work with young people, because I think that is important.
Definitely agreed. And like you said, Rory, they've been running what I understood to be kind of a trial in Wales here in the United Kingdom of putting counsellors within schools and apparently and I haven't seen the report, so this is me going on what I feel that I've heard. It has been successful, and they've been able to show that this is making a difference. And I've not worked in schools, but I have worked in colleges, so I have worked with younger people. And what I realised in working with younger people is that it doesn't matter what your age is, you can be facing unfaceable hardships within your life. And as adults, it's difficult enough for us to reach out and ask for help. But we have I guess we're perceived to have more power. We have money to pay for these things, or we can go to the doctor and ask for these things. But it's so difficult. If you are a child and you're going through a really, really difficult time, where do you go? And sometimes that difficult time that you may be going through means that you can't turn to your family because that difficulty may be rooted in your family. And within the schools, teachers are there and they have their agenda. Their agenda is to educate you and to get you through. They're not there to be able to deal with, they're not trained to be able to deal with the emotional stuff that you may bring in. So definitely a need for this. And I think you touched on a really important thing there, Rory. You know, the many graduates say it's difficult to find a job. It's challenging to find a job. Well, just think how many schools there are local to you in your area. And if each one of those has a counsellor in, that opens up a lot more work for us and a lot more opportunities, I guess. And I like what you said there, Rory. Go and train to be a child, an adolescent counsellor. That's where you want to be training now, doing your CPD.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I had my good friend and fellow practitioner, Kath Nibbs, come over to the studio here at Counselling Towers about a week ago, and she really is at the cutting edge of child and adolescent therapy. She's a researcher researching cyber trauma based on images that people see on the internet, or how children engage with the internet. And you know, she really is plowing the field, pushing everything forward, and she has a lot to say about the levelness of qualification that you need to be able to work with young people. And let me just give you a flavour of that. Do you know what my first ever client said to me when I was at a school?
Share it with us, Rory.
She said, "Do you know about Facebook?"
Yes.
And I said, "Yes." And it would have been impossible to have any kind of relationship with a therapeutic relationship, because if I hadn't have understood how Facebook works, and because that was the pivot of psychological contact. Yeah. The fact that her life was lived not only in what I call a corporeal sense, in other words, a physical person-to-person sense, as we would do if we're meeting face-to-face in real time, in reality, but also on an internet plane where we're working sort of across the internet. So I think practitioners need to understand that. I think an understanding of child development. I think an understanding of drug use and popular drugs. I use the word in a kind of populist way, drugs.
100%.
And also just a really good understanding of the fact that a child's world, or young person's world, really, that's how we should be talking about young people's world, is very, very different to someone who's a lot older, because their world, their frame of reference is absolutely, completely different, because they're seeing the world from different eyes.
100%.
So I think training, and I'm going to be controversial, I think that, you need some form of training to work as a child therapist, certainly if you're working below the ages of 16, definitely.
And you say that's being controversial. I'm going to underline that, and I'm going to underline it in red. And we've just had the recent change in the ethical framework, the BACP ethical framework here in the UK. And it is my feeling that if counsellors are brought into school, that the framework would be added to again. I would expect it to be in dealing with young children and adolescents. Training, I don't think should be controversial. I think it is an ethical requirement, because we study equality and diversity so that we can work with different people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different family structures. Well, the same is true of children, because the youth of today have their own language that they purposely don't share with us as grown-ups, because they don't want us to know what they're talking about. It's sick and it's wicked, and it's words that we need to understand. And when you were speaking about popular drug culture, I found from doing a little bit of CPD just the other day that if a young person is referring to Mandy, or we're going to go and get some Mandy, that this is like you say, Rory, a popular drug. It is MDMA, which is one of the active ingredients in ecstasy. So we need to understand this, because what we don't want to be doing is saying, what is Mandy? I don't understand that. because that's showing that we're not in their frame of reference. So definitely need to be informed to be able to work with young people.
Yeah, and what young people really, really hate is adults trying to get down with the kids. They really hate that. I remember when I used to teach young people, one of the things was that they used to laugh out loud at some colleagues who tried to get down with the kids, and pretend at some level that at 33 they were really 15, and young people see through that. They see it as a facade, as not being real, and what they want is someone who is stable in the world. They don't want someone with no disrespect, but someone who's 48 acting like they're 18. It just doesn't work. You're not going to make any connection there. So yeah, training, and and I'll go further. I'll get my red pen. I'll borrow Ken's red pen, and I would say that if you're coming out of maybe doing a person-centered course, even an integrative course, it doesn't really fully equip you to work with young people under the age of 16. You're really going to have to take some kind of qualification that gives you a solid understanding of young people's development, and also about the world that they perceive, and there's a lot of good courses out there. There's a lot of good courses out there. And the other thing, of course, is that you may have to work with parents. I've worked with parents as well as young people. I've had triangulation meetings. It is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah. When you think of contracting, is the young person able to contract? If you think of triangulation meetings where you may be working with social services, it is an area where training is mandatory, I believe. And if you want to hear more about this, Rory and I did do a podcast episode where we spoke at depth on this very subject, because Rory, as he shared at the beginning, did a good number of years working in schools. So he shares that, and you can listen to that in Counselling Tutor Podcast episode number 15. So you can go back into our back catalogue there. You should be listening to the whole back catalogue anyway, because they're all brilliant. Am I a bit biased there, Rory?
I think it might be. And also, we've got a super interview with Catherine Nibbs in the CSR library. So if you wanted to join our library, we have an online library that people can access, and there's a fantastic discussion that Catherine and myself had about 18 months ago, talking about working with young people, and also about the impact of the internet and how that affects what she terms the polyvagal system. Really, really interesting stuff. Brain development. It's all there.
Love it. And if you want to dip into that and episode 15, the way you do that is you go to our main website. That is counsellingtutor.com. If you want to find the podcast, just click on the podcast tab and go down to episode 15. And it's right there, counselling young people. It's also got some other topics covered in that podcast, but it's right there for you. And if you are thinking of joining the Counselling Study Resource, as Rory mentioned, a great rich source of learning, you can get the link from that from our homepage on Counselling Tutor as well. So we're going into theory with Rory, something modern. When you were speaking about the young people and the counsellors trying to get down with the kids, I could see with the peak cap with the wrong way round and the open shirt and saying all the lingo. And you're 100% right. It's just not congruent, is it?
They get corn t-shirts on.
But we are moving on to modernism now, and we're talking about postmodernism in therapy. Share a little bit, Rory.
Yeah, well, postmodernism is a movement in philosophy, Ken, that basically asks us to consider how we view the world in the time we're in. And that sounds really complicated, but I'm going to decode it. But effectively, in terms of therapy, postmodernism is about looking at therapies that don't draw on theories of the past, and certainly cause and effect. So if we think about transactional analysis, that would talk about adult ego state, child ego state, that kind of theory, games, rackets, that type of thing. Person-centered therapy draws on introjected values and conditions of worth. Behavioral therapies, such as REBT, draw on action, belief, and consequence. So there is a bit of a direction in the therapy, because the therapy bases itself on what it believes to be true about the world. With postmodern therapies, and I'm talking particularly about solution-focused and narrative therapy, it asks the person to make sense of the world they're in. with no reference to any theory that says this is how this should be. So with modern therapies or modernist therapies, A equals B equals C. So action, belief, and consequence. If we're looking at behavioural therapies, with postmodern therapies, we're actually asking people, what is it that is giving you this view of the world, and how do we work with it?
Great intro.
So yeah, it's really, really interesting, and and if you look behind me, Ken, on the wall at Counselling Towers, I've got a picture by Wassam Kandinsky, who's a postmodern painter. And you look at that, and it's shapes and colours, and you look at it and you think, I've no idea what that is. Why doesn't it tell me? Why doesn't that picture inform me and say, it should be a picture of someone's face, or it should be a nice scene? You look at the picture behind me of Wassam Kandinsky, and you have to make your own sense of it. That's postmodernism.
I love the picture that you've painted in that introduction. So without any further ado, let's get into theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees Oakes.
A few years ago, I was chatting to a colleague who is a sociologist, and during the conversation, the subject of postmodernism came up. We were trying to find a suitable way of teaching quite a complex and abstract idea to our students, and to help, she shared a story of a philosophy professor who set an assignment with the title, "What is Postmodernism?" A few weeks later, he sat down to mark the students' work, and amongst a pile of submissions, crammed with references and long detailed explanations of the questions he had set, he noticed one student's submission which made him laugh out loud. The student had submitted one A4 sheet of paper. It included the date, the essay number, and the student's name, and underneath the title, "What is Postmodernism?" the student had written, "This is a postmodern essay," and nothing else. The reason for the professor's laughter? Well, he absolutely understood that the concept of postmodernism was fully understood by the student. So what is postmodernism, and what's its link to counselling theories? Well, earlier in the introduction, I said to Ken that postmodernism is a philosophy. It's not quite true. It's a mindset, and it's a mindset that holds a general distrust of theories, ideologies and narratives that put all knowledge into a single framework. In other words, it challenges the big ideas we think are true and asks us to deconstruct them and critically evaluate them. Still confused? Yes. Okay, let's go back in history to around the 1600s. It's the time when religion lost its monopoly on explaining what constitutes reality, and individuals began to turn to science for explanations. The gradual movement of science progressed, and it led to the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th century, especially in the West. To do this, society embraced big ideas in areas such as commerce, science, literature, the arts, and psychology. This time in history was named modernism because it rejected ideas of the past and favoured its own view of the world. After the Second World War, philosophers began to question if the big ideas we had bought into were really useful in a post-war society. The term used for this thinking is postmodernism, after modernity, and it asks us to consider if the big ideas of the modernist era are still useful in the 20th and the 21st century. So let's have a look at some modernist ideas in therapy. And remember, we're talking big ideas here that people believe to be truths. So let's have a look at Sigmund Freud, his ideas of early childhood experience influencing how we experience ourselves as adults, or that we're in conflict with our tripartite personality, known as the id, the ego, or the superego, a big idea. What about Albert Ellis, who teaches us that we have irrational thoughts which cause dysfunctional beliefs, action, belief and consequence, a big idea. Or Carl Rogers, who believed that interjected values and conditions of worth stopped us becoming fully functional people, a big idea. Postmodern therapy helps clients deconstruct and examine their beliefs and the value they place on them. For example, a postmodern therapist may question the definition of mental health as well as commonly held assumptions of the definition of success and what it means to be an adolescent. It also questions whether the ideas of the past in the modernist era are useful now. But it does focus on the relationship between the client and the therapist, and it's highly collaborative. And change comes through for the client primarily through open conversation and dialogue. And there's two main types of postmodern therapy. There's narrative therapy, which evaluates the client's thoughts and behaviours in the context of their culture and the story they've written for themselves. So narrative in this case is about the client's story and the story they believe to be true. And it asks clients to evaluate that story in terms of their experience of the world. The other therapy, which is a short-term therapy, is solution-focused, and it focuses on creating solutions to problem rather than evaluating the root causes of them. So no going down the path of parent, adult, child, or action, belief, or consequence, or interjected values or conditions of worth. This is very much the thinking of that if a client has successfully solved a problem before, it may be that problem-solving technique may work again. And again, they're all postmodern because they reject the big theories of the past. And indeed, they don't make any reference to any theory. They're more interested in the client's unique experience of themselves and how they view the world. Which takes us neatly back to the philosophy professor at the beginning of the story who laughed at his student's submission. The reason he laughed at it was a postmodern essay rejected the big thinking of the past, the modernist idea that for an assignment to be successful and to get past, it needed references, it needed lots of words, and it also needed huge amounts of explanation. This is a postmodern essay, really was what it was. It rejected everything of the past and lived on its own as a statement.
Thank you very much, Rory. Well, while you were saying that, I was looking over your shoulder and I was looking at that picture by, who did you say was the artist?
Wassam Kandinsky.
I can't pronounce it. But by that person. And what I was realizing is that it is about my interpretation. When I look at that picture, it's what I see there, and I think that's what that's what you've eloquently covered, that it is about, I guess, phenomenological view of the person who is experiencing it. We get back to this word phenomenology again and again, do we not?
We do, which is postmodern,
it is
it is a postmodern idea.
You've got to get the download for this. Rory has taken the time to decode postmodernism, and you can get that by just going to today's episode on our website. In the show notes there is a link and you can directly download that, and to find that you go to counsellingtutor.com. If you're coming in for the first time, that's 2 L's in counselling, because Rory and I are based in the United Kingdom. That's how we spell it here. Counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 33, and you can get the link to Rory's download there, Decoding Postmodernism. And moving on now to a topic that came up in our Facebook group. We have got over 4,000 members in that Facebook group now. It's a lot. In fact, you know what? It's a lot over 4,000. When I looked, it was getting on to 4,500 members. And it's counselling students and tutors from all around the world. We hang out, and it's such a rich vein of information. So if you haven't dipped your toe in there, please come and join us. And to find that, you just go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, and we're right there at the top. Knock on the door because it's a closed group. For students and tutors are welcome as well, and we will let you in. But the question was one that we see from time to time, especially when people are just going into practice at the end of the studies or into placement, where you need to go out and start your counselling. And it's, what do we do about insurance? So what's your thoughts on insurance, Rory?
Well, it's an ethical imperative now. So if you're, with the new BACP ethical framework that went live in July of last year, 2016, we're expected to carry professional indemnity insurance. So if a complaint's made against us, we can either form a defence, or if a client sues us, we have the ability for the insurance company to pay out. So now, yes, it is mandatory if you're working to the BACP ethical framework. And indeed, I think other ethical frameworks. I don't think it's just the BACP. And also, I think it's really, really useful. It gives you comfort because, we do live in an age of a litigious age where people will go to court. I was watching Judge Rinder on the TV, which is a UK-based programme about a TV judge who kind of pontificates on the law. In America, it's usually called Judge Judy. And it just shows that the access to the law and people taking legal cases has come of age in this country. It's in popular consciousness. It's postmodern, Ken. So
I like that.
I would say, I would say that it's important because if lawyers aren't cheap. Lawyers aren't cheap, and if you have to go to court, and I don't want to scare people, there's very, 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 very few therapists who are taken to court. But if you go to court and the ruling goes against you, and costs and a fine or that type of thing, you could end up having to sell your house, or go bankrupt. So, it's a good thing, and I feel a lot safer knowing that if anything were to go wrong, that at least I've got access to a legal fund. My insurance company funds would fund the legal defence. So very important. What's your thoughts, Ken?
What you've said, of course, and I'm mindful as well that because it is an ethical imperative, you need an insurer before you can go into practice. And when you have an insurer, you'll be given documents which kind of outline the terms and conditions of that insurance that you then hold. And it's really worth reading through what's in those documents, because those documents are what you would call on when you need your insurance. And it's better to know before you need it what's in those documents to make sure that you comply with it. Because in a way, when you're in your room with your client, you're not alone with that client. The BACP, or the ethical framework to which you work, is in that room with you. It's part of how you will inform your practice and how you will deliver your service. But your insurer is also in there with you, because there are certain conditions that you need to make for your insurance to be in place. And very often things that your insurance will refer to things like note-taking, that you need to keep notes. And it will refer to your ethical framework, and that you need to be following your ethical framework, and that you need to have supervision in place, and that you need to be continuing your professional development. These can be mentioned in your insurer's contract with you. And if you haven't kept that up, then you're not covered by that insurance. So that is just one consideration. And the question, particularly in the Facebook group, was which insurer should I go with? And I would suggest phone them, speak to them. It's very easy for any company to put a glossy advert in a magazine and say how wonderful they are. What happens when you need them? And usually when you need them, that's the time you pick up the phone and you phone them. So if you're going to phone through and wait for half an hour to speak to someone, maybe that's not the insurer to go for. So give them a call and ask them and say, what do you offer and why should I come to you? And be informed in your decision.
Yeah, and a few years ago, Ken, I absolutely agree. A few years ago, I had calls to contact my insurer because I'd had some notes requested by the police. And the first thing I did was to phone up my insurance.
Yeah.
And my insurance, I can remember what the person on the other end of the phone said. You've not told them anything, have you? And I said, I've not said anything. Good, right, we'll come back to you. And then they phoned their insurance broker up. And what was really interesting was that they had a distinct view about what I could disclose without the client's permission. And it was broadly in line with the BACPs.
Yeah.
But it wasn't in line with the organisation I was working for. The organisation were very keen for me to say, "Oh, it's fine, just send me notes."
Yeah.
But the BACP and the insurance company said no. And it was actually I was working with a young person, and it was Fraser guidelines, which is something else you're going to have to learn about if you want to be a child therapist, which takes us back to the earlier part. So really helpful, really supportive, and actually it went okay. It was fine. It went absolutely fine, and everything was explained to the police. The police were very supportive, and eventually I got permission to disclose. I sent my notes, and I never heard anything. So there you go. But that initial phone call was definitely a lifesaver, because it gave me a sense of what I needed to do.
And I think that's a really important point that you've brought out there. Your ethical framework to which you work. So I'm going to use the BACP in this example. They will have an ethics department that you can phone if you have a question, but they are there to interpret what is in the framework. They're not there to advise you. In fact, they are likely to not advise you, but your insurer will. Your insurer will give you advice. So it's interesting that when you had an ethical dilemma, Rory, you phoned your insurer. And that quite rightly so, because they were supportive, and that's what you want out of an insurer. And those are the kind of questions that you can ask. I know that some insurers provide free CPD, continuing professional development, for people that are members. You can access their document library. I know, I'm going to mention a name here, but there are so many. I'm not pushing any particular provider, but I know Howden offer insurance for therapists, and they have documents, a whole document archive that you can dip into with so much information. From time to time, they do online lectures as well. So it's, what are you getting out of it? And do you feel supported when you need them, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. And as they say on the BBC, other insurers are available.
Yeah,
but,
definitely.
But yeah, it is important. And one final thing, don't be convinced. It's really easy when you're a student to take advice from people who you perceive know more than you do. And, I've come across when I was teaching where I'd say you need to get your own indemnity insurance long before it was an ethical requirement, And the students would come back and they'd say, oh, it's okay, Rory, because the organisation's got indemnity insurance and I don't need it. And I'd say, yes, but it's their insurance.
Yeah.
So it's up to them if they activate it. They've paid for it. And if they don't want to activate it, and that happened. There was one case I heard a few years ago, a good few years ago now, where there's a complaint made. The student didn't have their own insurance. They went to the organisation who told them that they had, said, I need some help. And they went, oh, no, we're not going to activate our insurance because that's a cost to us.
Yeah. Yeah. That is such words of wisdom and a hard lesson, I guess, for the person who had to learn that when they looked to their organisation that they were working in, expecting, I am covered by your insurance. And I guess when you're thinking about that, think about how it works with motor insurance. Certainly here in the UK, when you have to dip in or activate your insurance, your premium may go up. There's a charge premium go up. So it's in an organisation's, I guess, best interest to not activate the insurance unless they really, really have to, because there could be an increase in premium. Whereas if it's your insurance, you make the decision of when that is activated. So this is all about you. So the answer, I guess, is you need to have a look around and see what's right for you. It's very easy to find. You put into Google insurance for counsellor, and believe me, the companies that offer that service are going to be right there at the top. And shop around and phone them. I say phone them. Don't just go on what they say on their website. Give them a call, see how quickly you get through and how helpful they are to you on the phone.
Absolutely. And one final point on that, Ken, my insurance renews in May. And a few weeks before, I got a phone call from my insurance company and they said, oh, hello, is that Rory? I said, yeah. Yeah, how did the thing go with the police? And I said, well, I heard nothing else. Oh, when you say nothing else, what do you mean by that? Well, I didn't hear anything at all. Right, good. Right. And they were just checking out that nothing had happened. If I'd have said, well, I had to go to court, you can bet your bottom dollar that I would have had a few more forms to fill in, and that they wanted to know what the outcome of the court case was. I would have had to supply a whole load of documents, and that is modern professional counselling life.
Wow. What an episode. Episode 33. It's certainly been interesting. And we've taken a journey. We've gone from what is now current, putting counsellors into schools within the United Kingdom. We've looked at theory with Rory and postmodernism. And of course, we've spoken about insurance for you as a counsellor, as a psychotherapist. Hopefully you found some value. We would so love if you could leave us a review on iTunes. And if you've left us a review before, You can leave one for every episode, should you wish to.
So it's Postmodern way.
We love reading your reviews. And what happens if you leave take the time to leave a review on iTunes is it means that the Counselling Tutor Podcast goes a little bit higher in iTunes, and it means that it gets seen by more people, students of counselling psychotherapy around the world. So we get to share the world. So you help other people to engage in the podcast as well. So if you've got some time, do that for us. Otherwise, hang out on the Facebook page. Let's get the conversations going there. I am just always so grateful. This is a privilege to be able to bring this to you, and I thank you for listening.
Yep, and that brings us to the end of this edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and get insured.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.